Okay, so we're matching up our bottom corners on both sides. You remember we've still got that top part that's already been stitched. So I'm just going to kind of put in a few clips on to let me know what I'm doing. And I'm just going to open this up so that I can see where my stitching finished. And you can either stitch from here down, or you can stitch from the bottom up. And I find it easier to stitch from the bottom upwards. So I'm going to turn my work up the other way. And stitch up the side here using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And what you should have is you should actually meet the end of the stitching that you've already done at the top of your bag. So I'm just going to put my finger on there just to make sure that I'm going to exactly the right place. I want my stitching to match. I'm back stitching a couple of stitches, and that does match perfectly with my line of stitching that I'd already done at the top part of my bag. But you see the seam allowance on that is nice and stitched open, so you kind of have to almost hold that seam allowance together so that you can match it up. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. Again, I'm coming from the bottom upwards, so from these sort of corner cutouts upwards using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And again, I'm just going to hold that seam allowance kind of shut, that bottom bit of seam allowance, so that I can see the end of my stitching that I had at the top. So we're going to then remove our basting stitches. There's lots of removing stitches. And you can ask yourself, why do we do all that basting? What's the point, really? Does it make a difference? It does. It holds your foam in place. It means that nothing moves. It really is worth basting your foam. I'll be honest and say I don't always, but certainly when you baste it, you can pull your fabrics nice and taut across the top of the foam, which means you don't get any kind of slightly baggy looking bags on the outside. So let's just remove all of these basting stitches. Oh, the scissors fell on the floor, went there. And then I'm going to carefully remove the foam from the seam allowance in exactly the same way as we did at the top and along the bottom. Be careful not to trim into your stitching. You can see when I trim away the foam, I always have my scissors sort of on this side. It means you get kind of a mitered edge on your foam, so it's a little less bulky. Foam is great for structure, but you don't want it to give bulk in places that you don't want bulk. So we'll take away the foam on both sides. From the seam allowance. And then I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to press these seam allowances open on both sides. So I'm finger pressing initially, but I'm just going to there is an easier way of doing this. You get off your bum and you go and get your pressing ham rather than putting your hand inside of it. But I'm not absolutely sure where I put it. I had a bit of a tidy up. It's always a big mistake. And actually, because there's foam in here, I'm quite comfortable pressing that seam allowance. And you can see that seam allowance presses open quite easily. So I start by finger pressing. So I've got a bit of foam there still. I promise you, taking out every last bit of foam will make a huge difference to the way your side seams look. Sometimes when you see bags that have got side seams, they sort of roll in at the sides. If you cut all the foam out and open the seam allowances and press from the inside and press from the outside, you should get a nice flat side, which is what you ideally want. So let's just press that open with my finger to start with. And get the iron on the job. And say I have got asbestos hands, but there is foam between me and the iron, so I don't feel that I'm gonna in any imminent danger of burning myself. I actually can't even feel any heat through the foam. And there we go, that's the second side all pressed. So you can turn it in the other way and check that everything's all right if you want to, but we're going to move on to the box corners next.